Hey y'all, my name's Jay Wilson. Thank you so much for joining me today in this webinar. I'm a database developer and Jet Reports consultant over at Onyx Reporting, and I'm here today to present to you guys a little bit about visualizing financials. I am available for demos if you want to see a demo of Jet Reports against your live data, or if you need training services or support on your implementation, I'm available for freelance work at jae@onyxreporting.com. Okay, enough shameless advertising. Let's get to it. Today we're going to take a look at visualizing your financials using the Jet Reports product suite and Power BI, so stay tuned. I know, not all of us are involved in financial reporting. However, that said, if you're in sales, procurement, production, whatever, a lot of the techniques that I cover today are going to apply to any data set that you have in NAV. And so the way I'm structuring this presentation is we're going to take a look at building or an income statement that I built for a client using the Jet Professional add-in. We're going to use that as a springboard for kind of understanding, okay, if you invested in Jet Enterprise, how would you recreate your income statement using Jet Enterprise and Pivot Tables? And then from there, we're going to see, okay, well, what would it take to then do that in Power BI? And the answer is not a lot. So I think this is going to be a pretty long session, but I'll try to keep it succinct. And if you want to get a copy of the code samples or the code that I wrote, again, just email me at jae@onyxreporting.com, and I'm happy to send this either this spreadsheet or a copy of the code that I wrote to you. Right then. So here is a sample of a truncated version of the income statement that I built for my client. You can see here that we're calculating actuals, percent of revenue, the year-to-date numbers, and percent of sales or percent of revenue. And it just so happens that in Cronus, the standard, fake database, there isn't a lot of data there. There isn't a lot of data there, but for demo purposes, it gets the job done. If I press Control-tilde here, we can see how this report is built. We've got a blend of Excel functions, a little bit of static text for my chart of accounts, and then an NL first and NL sum function, which are Jet professional functions for extracting data directly out of NAV and populating, obviously my income statement report. Then over here, I've got percent of revenue, and you can see here I'm using basically an if statement. If D11 does not equal 0, so, sorry, that's backwards. If my denominator doesn't equal 0, then do the numerator divided by the denominator, otherwise return a 0. So that's just to accommodate for what happens if there were no revenue. Okay. And I think this is a pretty straightforward kind of income statement. We've seen something like this or variations of it before, but I found this notion of the percent of revenue, right? Each individual income account as a percent of revenue or every expense account as a percent of revenue. I found that kind of compelling and an interesting metric, which I've then, of course, wanted to share with you guys so you could see how it's done. Now, but before we get to that, let's take a quick look at Jet Enterprise. Jet Enterprise gives you the ability to represent your data using a pivot table as opposed to NL sums and NL count functions. And I think that's really important. It's very valuable for you to have because, it gives you flexibility. Today you might say, you know what, Jay, I want to see my report where I see the total amount by, I see amount year to date by the GL account numbers, and tomorrow you might come to my desk and say, you know what, Jay, I really need it broken out by the various departments, my global dimension 1. Now just, how easy was it to just drag and drop global dimension 1 into my pivot table? Now for those of you who've actually spent time building a JET report, imagine how challenging it could be to implement your global dimension 1s going across in columns, but still maintaining all of each of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns per global dimension 1, right? It's either really easy and apparent to you, or it's going to take a lot of hours to get the job done. And again, I think that's really the upshot to JET Enterprise and using cubes to analyze your data is you have that ad hocness. You can just be flexible in your data exploration. All right. But I guess the piece we're missing is we don't have that % of revenue in here. And I've seen people do this, and it kind of makes me a little sad. Let me filter by income balance. Hold on, this part doesn't make me sad. I'm just going to choose to show just my income statement accounts. Okay. And let's expand revenue. Let's expand cost. What I've seen people do is they say, oh, I need a ratio. I want to show sales of retail as a %, and so they'll do the equals this divided by that. And yeah, sure, you get a number. That's good. And then you'll do it again, equals this divided by that. And maybe you'll even make this an absolute reference. But this isn't what you want. And I say that because you can't just treat it like you would a normal Excel function and drag down, and you would expect all of these to be a different percentage because all of these numbers are different. But we're not using cell references here. This is not equals C7. This is a equals get pivot data function, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It gets data out of your pivot table based off of this combination of arguments. And the part where it really kind of goes awry is when you start changing what your report looks like, or maybe you change the content or you drill down, then you start seeing these pound ref errors. And again, that's just not ideal. And I think a couple weeks ago I blogged about how you can get around this problem, how you can create metrics that exist outside of your pivot table by clicking on Analyze and converting your pivot table into formulas. Now what I like about this is that instead of having a pivot table, I have a series of cube member and cube value functions. And that's pretty good stuff, but where it really shines is that I can now use the cell references that I'm familiar with to create my various metrics, and I don't have to worry about it ever breaking because this is not a pivot table. These are just static functions which I can take and move around. If you say, oh, I want to have an empty row for cost, right, I can restructure what this all looks like. Let me go back to having this be a pivot table. Okay, so there's that. You can have functions external to your pivot table by converting it to cube values, but there's kind of a downside there, isn't it? Which is what happens either in your JET Professional report or in your cube value report. What happens when you add a new GL account? What happens when we sneak in, oh yeah, we created account 7160 to cover a new retail expense? Well, now you have to remember to update all of your reports that are built using cube value functions, or you have to remember to insert a new row here for your JET reports, JET Professional functions. And if you forget to do that, your numbers will be off. Again, that's why I'm pretty attached to pivot tables, and that I'm really excited about the structure and rigidity that Power BI will bring to your analytics while still being flexible. All right. Anyway, let's get to it. Let's figure out what it would take to build this metric, amount as a percent of revenue, into your cubes. So let's see, amount as a percent of revenue. Let's work backwards. In order to have, what is amount as a percent of revenue? Well, it's the amount divided by, I guess, revenue amount, isn't it? That's not too exciting. That's pretty straightforward. Okay. And then I guess, what is revenue amount? And while we're at it, is there any way we can get revenue to be a positive number and get our costs to be negative numbers? You think that's something we can get in there? Can we invert the sign for income statement accounts? And we can't just multiply amount by -1 because in our balance sheet section, this is actually correct. You know, we don't need to invert the sign of balance sheet accounts. We just need to invert the sign of income statement accounts. So those are the 3 pieces to the puzzle, and I guess if we want to, we can also cover amount year to date as a percent of revenue. Right, we can also cover that variation of that, which would be amount year to date divided by revenue amount year to date. Okay, those are the pieces we need. All right. Well, for the time being, I'm going to recommend that we create a new measure called amount display. This is the easiest way into getting into customizations. Let's create a measure called amount display, and amount display is just going to be equal to amount. They're going to be the same number. I'm going to add a calculated measure. We're going to call it amount display. I'm going to add a format string, assign it to the finance transactions measure group, and we're just going to drag and drop, and we'll say amount display is the same thing as amount. Okay. Now all I have to do here is I have to go to advanced and reapply calculated measures and script commands. I don't have to deploy and execute. I'm not going to get to the whys and wherefores, but in most cases, if you're just adding new measures, calculated measures to the cube, you just have to reapply script commands. And I can go here. And I can refresh my my pivot table. I'm going to take out amount year to date for now, and oh, what's going on? I just want to show my income statement accounts. Okay. And then hopefully if I did this right, under amount I have a new measure called amount display, and you'll notice amount and amount display are exactly the same. The only difference is the formatting is slightly different, but these numbers are all effectively the same. All right. I'm going to continue using amount display, and I'm going to use it to define revenue amounts. But what is revenue amount? I mean, yes, we know it's this number here, but how do I extract that number from the cube? What I recommend you do when you're at that what is blah, blah, blah phase, I recommend that you show it in your pivot table. Get it to the point where you can see it in your pivot table, so there's revenue. And then you're going to click on OLAP tools and convert to formulas. And then in this cube member function here that represents revenue, I can now see that revenue is this. This here is revenue. And you probably knew right away. You're like, oh yeah, revenue. It's just the begin total account for GL account number 4461 or 4000 or whatever the number actually is. But it's going to be some sort of GL account number, right? And this is revenue. Now, if you don't have a begin total account in nav called revenue, you can just add one. Let me take that back. Talk to your guy who knows nav. Talk to your financial controller first before you just go about modifying your chart of accounts. But in order for this technique to work, you do need a begin total account called revenue amount or revenue or something like that. If you don't, there are workarounds, and I can help you with that. But that's outside of the scope of this tutorial. All right, let's create a measure called revenue. Now before I do that, I'm actually going to create a measure folder just for keeping things organized. And you can see in your stock project you have a folder for balance and amount year to date. You have several folders already. I'm just adding a new one for revenue. I'm going to create a calculated measure called, I'll just call it revenue. It's implied. The amount will be implied. Okay. All right, so what is revenue? Revenue is just the display amount, but it's also the display amount when you're looking at the chart of accounts, account number 6100. So I'm creating what's called a tuple here using MDX. MDX stands for, I want to say, multi-dimensional expression language. You don't have to know that tidbit. What is important to know is it is a language just like SQL is its own query language. And there are books written about SQL, and so too there are books written about MDX. But what I'll do is if I'm trying to get something done and I don't know off the top of my head, how do you express that? How do you say that in MDX? I'll Google it. No joke, I'll Google it, and a lot of times people have blogged about it or written about it on Stack Overflow, and you'll see different answers, and actually it's a lot of fun. You learn something new every day if you just spend a little time reading Stack Overflow. So there you go. This is how we're going to calculate revenue, and if I spelled it all correctly and everything works out fine, once I reapply script measures and commands, pop over to my pivot table here and refresh. If all goes as expected, I should have a new measure folder called revenue, and when I drag in revenue, I can see, aha, I have the same revenue on every single line. And that revenue amount should be the same, and they are. So that's good. We're excited about that. We've calculated revenue amount. The next piece of the puzzle is to calculate amount as a % of revenue, and again, it's just basic division. So I'm going to create a new calculated measure called amount as % of revenue. We'll assign it to our folder here, and it's amount display divided by revenue. Let's reapply script commands. Oh, this is a %. Let's make sure we change the format string. % will be that. So show 2 decimal places and a % symbol. All right, now let's test it. Let me take out amount. Let me take out revenue and pop in amount as a % of revenue. Okay, and now I've got my percentages. And so if I eyeball this, the revenue was 99,000 divided, or 71,000 divided by 99. Yeah, I could see that being 71%. 4,000 divided by almost 10,000. Yeah, I could see that being 4.59%. Okay, these numbers just really quickly, they pass a sniff test in terms of showing percentages. Beautiful. Now, one thing that's slightly less beautiful is what happens if I don't show the chart of accounts, right? The whole purpose of building these metrics into the pivot table is flexibility, and I don't want to have to show my chart of accounts. So I'm going to take out the chart of accounts. I'm going to include revenue again, but this time I'm going to slice my data by some other field. So I'm going to slice by global dimension 1. I'm going to slice by department. So I can see I have values for my display amount, but I have no revenue for admin or production. I only have revenue and sales. And in that case, I have my percentage and it works fine, but these other ones throw a pound num error. And those of you who are remembering your good old math days, you can divide 0 by something, but you cannot divide something by 0. Your divisor cannot be 0. And in this instance, our revenue, which is the divisor, is 0, and that's why we're getting this pound num error. Now in Excel, we accommodated for that using an if statement. If D17 does not equal 0, then do the thing, otherwise return 0. So I need to include the equivalent of an if statement in my function. Now I just happen to know that in the cubes there is a division business function. And the business functions are these blue guys here, and you'll see a couple of them if you look through the stock project. And these blue guys, these business functions, are predefined, parameterized MDX queries or expressions. So somebody at Jet Reports, basically they wrote a library of, I want to say 20 plus predefined functions to make it easy for us to calculate division without having to know, oh, by the way, you should probably check to make sure your divisor is not 0. But the good news is, given that these this library exists, you can copy this formula here and use this to learn MDX, or at least learn or understand how this bit of division works. In your ideal of ideal worlds, when I go to add a new calculated measure, I should or would like to see a little blue guy here that says snippets or business functions. And for me, it's not there because I didn't install the business function library. I forgot to, is the truth. And for you, when you go to add new new calculated measures to your cube, hopefully you have a function library in place. But if you don't, give me a holler, jae@onyxreporting.com, and I'll set up a time and I'll just do it for you for free. It's no big deal. All right. Given that I don't have a business function library installed, I'm going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to actually have to write out the proper MDX for an if check. But I'm going to cheat. I'm going to use another copy of the code from elsewhere. All right, you can see here the if statement accepts 3 arguments. The first argument says what is the, what do you want to check for if something equals true or blah blah blah, right? You know how an if statement works. So this is saying if the denominator has a value, then do the math, else return a null. And all I have to do is just copy in my code and replace what's already there. So this, and then just do a quick check. Is there revenue? If there is no revenue, just return the value null. Okay. Piece of cake, guys. Piece of cake. I go back to my pivot table, and hopefully when I refresh, these pound num errors, oh, it's beautiful. They just go away because I did a check. I checked to see if there was revenue, and if there was no revenue, just return a null because otherwise I'd get that pound num error. Well, there you go. I'm halfway there. I can now, because I've created amount as a percent of revenue, just like we did in our income statement, because I've created it as part of my cube, I can actually slice and dice by any possible dimension. So I don't have to use global dimension 1. I could slice it by document type. I could slice it by, well, dates, obviously. Right? Anything is possible as long as your code kind of holds up to the different ways that it can be sliced and diced. Okay. Let me go back to showing my chart of accounts, though, because that's familiar. And I'm looking at, why does this look the way it does? Oh, because I'm showing income statement. What is going on here? Why am I confused? Let me take out revenue, that's why. Okay. Good. Good, good, good. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I want to invert the sign of my income statement accounts. Let's go back and do what we talked about earlier, where we said, you know, I want revenue to display as a positive number, and I want my expenses to be negative numbers. Okay. Well, one thing I also said is I only want to apply that calculation if we're looking at income statement accounts, because balance sheet accounts, they're fine. Don't mess with the balance sheet. And the next question is, what does it mean to be an income statement account, or what does it mean to be a balance sheet account? And I said, to get that, just show the data in your pivot table and then convert to formulas. So here, it just gives me this lovely string here. It says, well, if GL account is equal to a 1, or sorry, if income balance is equal to a 1, you're a balance sheet. If you're equal to a 0, you're an income statement. And if you're a 0, we want to take the amount multiplied by -1. If you're a 1, just be amount. Okay, let's go to our cubes. What we need to do in order to implement this, like change the calculation depending on what slice of the cube you're in. In order to do that, we're going to use what's called a scope statement. Now, what a scope statement allows you to do is it allows you to say, okay, let's pick a slice of the cube. Let's pick a slice to work on. So that slice is going to be, for starters, just the measure called amount display. So that's, you know, we took the entirety of the cube and we sliced it into this one small piece, this small sliver. And I'm going to divide that sliver even further. I'm going to say, well, you know what? I want to subdivide this slice into where the GL account income balance is equal to 0. And when it is equal to 0, I want the calculation to be, oh no, I pressed escape. Dang it. Sorry. Okay. When I get to the slice of amount, display, and income balance, then use the calculation amount times -1. Now you'll notice I'm ending each statement with a semicolon. You have to do that or it doesn't work, and it will be the hunt for it's like hunting for a needle in the haystack. Where did I forget to put the ending, the semicolon? It's no good. Now, each scope statement ends with an end scope statement. You also have to have that as well. I could leave things like this, but I should probably scope out what it means to be a balance sheet account. So if you are a balance sheet account, then you're just amount. Okay? And, ooh, look at that, almost missed it, semicolons. All right, so that's your scope statement. Again, all your scope statement does is it allows you to change a calculation depending on the sliver of the cube that you're looking at. Hopefully I spelled everything correctly, we'll see. Sometimes this can be a little tedious. Oh, I still want you to be a pivot table. Can we go back to being a pivot table? Okay. All right, let's check our pivot table. Let's see how we did. Put you up here, slice by our chart of accounts. Okay, so, ooh. That's what I want. Okay, you'll notice here when I don't slice by income balance, the sign is not inverted. And I would argue that that's good because I still want it to net out to 0. But as soon as I filter by income statement, look how the signs have inverted. So now my revenue is a positive number, my costs are all negative, but my percent of revenue is still correct because, again, it's just cascading updates. I love it. I love it. So that takes us through, we used a scope statement to do this, we used a tuple to do that, we used a business function or MDX to do division, and now we're at the last bit, which was to do our year-to-dates. Okay. All right, let's do this. Now, year-to-date is another blue guy. It's another business function. And if I go into looking at amount year-to-date, I can see, oh, amount year-to-date is, well, here's the MDX calculation for it. And I'm just going to copy that MDX here. I'm going to add a new business function, or sorry, a new calculated measure. And this is going to be amount year-to-date display. And everything's going to stay the same. The only thing I have to do is indicate that this should be called amount-display. Okay. So, I don't really want to spend too much time getting into it, but here I've got another MDX expression that's broken out into a couple pieces. Oops. Gotta go. All right. And close parentheses. Yeah. All right, so this says take the sum of the year-to-date of the date YQMD current member and the display amount, and that's how you calculate amount year-to-date. There's really great articles on the time-based expressions in MDX. And I think this is really important for you guys to learn, especially if you're doing, kind of comparisons. You're like, I want to do year to date, I want to do last year, I want to do last month, I want to do rolling 12, stuff like that. These are all time-based MDX functions. All right, so I've added amount year to date display. I need revenue amount year to date. So it's going to be the same thing again. Okay, all of the indentation is not actually required. For me, I just find it easier to read when it's indented properly because I can see where the opening and close parentheses begin and end, but you don't have to put that in. It just has to resolve. And then I'm going to copy-paste my division and add a new calculated measure for amount year-to-date as a % of revenue. And the different format string. And then I just have to make sure to update these. Okay, let's see what we did. Okay. So right now my pivot table is not filtered by date. That was just kind of that little bit of clicking I did just now. And if I drop an amount year to date, which we know should work out of the cubes, out of the box, I get no value. And I get no value because I'm not filtering by date. I haven't even told it what month or what year we're looking at. So in order for these time-based functions to work, you must add a date filter. You must choose a year or a month. And I'm going to do our January 2016 because I know it works. Okay. So I have data for amount year to date. Let's see if the functions that I built, if the calculated measures that I built work. So we should have display, amount display. Where's my amount display? Oh, did I not refresh? Okay, here's my amount display. Again, signs are doing what I want them to do. They're inverting. And then what about my revenue percent? I've got numbers. It's glorious. And if I change this to 2016, Q4, yep, still does what it's supposed to do. So this is done. This static JET professional income statement has been recreated in JET Data Manager. Oh, excuse me. Has been recreated in the JET Data Manager. And again, what I really like about making sure that all of my metrics exist in the cubes is that I have the flexibility to say, you know what? I want to show my data any number of ways, whether it's broken out by geo account or by department and document type. Right, I have all sorts of flexibility in how I show my data, and I won't have that problem that we saw earlier with this pound ref error. Because with this pound ref error, I was trying to build cell references into a pivot table. And again, it's just not ideal. And the last step, of course, we said, and I promised, is we would show your work in Power BI. Let me make a new. Okay, I'm super excited about Microsoft investing all of this time and effort into making Power BI a robust complement to Excel. I don't think Power BI is going to replace Excel. And I really, really struggle with people who make it sound like, oh, Excel's dead, Power BI is going to take over the world. That's really not the case at all. Power BI serves a very different function. But it is important to know that updates, there are regular updates to Power BI, something like quarterly, even possibly monthly. So do try to be on top of the updates because they do release lots of new features. And one of the features released last year, so it's not necessarily new, is an update or an upgrade to the way we can connect to your SQL Server Analysis Services database. Jet Enterprise is a SQL Server Analysis Services database. And which to me is just mind-blowing because it makes Jet Enterprise a tool that you can use with minimal training if you're a SQL guy. If you're a SQL BI developer and you want to get stuff done faster, better, stronger, you can use Jet Enterprise because it's transparent and it works with all of the tools you're already familiar with. But for the people who are more interested from the reporting and analytics perspective, localhost, Jet Nav, OLAP. I regularly get questions from people, hey, will Jet Enterprise work with Power BI? And I say, well, why wouldn't it? Of course it does. Now that said, this section here is important. Import versus Connect Live. You want the Connect Live option if you are using the Jet Enterprise cubes. Because when you choose the Connect Live option, what it will do is it will import your entire data model into Power BI. And it looks exactly like it did earlier. Or rather, it looks exactly like it does in Excel. So I can go in here and I can add my amount display. I can show my amount as a % of revenue. But it's going to behave exactly like Excel does, insofar as you now have to you have to slice it by GL account or something in order for these numbers to start making sense. So I'm going to pop in my chart of accounts dimension here. And % of revenue is going to go to the line. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. But maybe this visualization isn't the best one for right now. Let me go back to, let's do a bar graph. Take out you. Okay. All right, fine. If you are using the live connector, and this is why I was harping about it earlier, if you use the live connector, you cannot create custom queries, you cannot create custom calculations. And that's why we went through the time to make sure all of our calculations exist in the Jet Data Manager. Otherwise, you can't do it. You can't see that %. You can't go out here and say equals blah, 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 blah. That doesn't work. Okay. If you're using the import model, you can create custom measures in Power BI, but now you're creating a data model in Power BI and you have a data model in Jet Enterprise, and it's just going to be an administrative headache to have two developing data models in two different places. That kind of defeats the purpose of governance, really, in my opinion. All right. From here, we can still do the things we love and adore. Ooh, not that button. Let's try that again. As you start working in Power BI, you can do all the things you love and adore, like add your slicers. So if I want to drop in a slicer for the year or the month. Oop, wrong one. Come back. Not you. Date, YQMD, month. Yes, you. Okay. So you can add in your slicers. just as you have before. January, where's my data? Where's January? There it is. Okay, you can add slicers, and one of the things that I like about Power BI that you don't have in Excel is that you can have visualizations that interact with each other. And what I mean by that is, display amount, okay. Were I to click on, let's say, production here, you see how it kind of filtered the other report. And, you know, yeah, of course, if you click on slicers, you would expect it to filter both reports. But you have this new degree of interactivity between your two visualizations, which will allow you, if you can imagine, if you have 3 or 4 visualizations that talk about different aspects of finance or expenses or sales analytics, you can just see them how each piece of the puzzle kind of reflects or reacts to the other. And you can change how some of these interactions work as well. All right, one of these days I'm going to have to do a longer Power BI tutorial video, but for now that takes us to the end of my webinar. My name's Jay Wilson at Onyx Reporting. In this tutorial I kind of wanted to review that income statement that I built for a client using Jet Professional, using NL First and NL Sum functions, because I wanted to highlight that Jet Professional on its own is still a very powerful, very relevant tool when it comes to laying out structured and formatted reports. And I think it's not going anywhere, especially as nav upgrade cycles get faster and faster and people are migrating to or upgrading their ERPs. They want reports that are going to continue to work no matter what version of nav they're using. And Jet Reports promises that, and it is pretty flexible, and it has, I think, done a pretty good job of delivering that. Now that said, Jet Enterprise is also giving people more excuse me. Jet Professional or Jet Enterprise is giving users more flexibility by offering them the ability to analyze their data in pivot tables in a flexible ad hoc kind of way. And remember how excited people were about self-service BI when Power BI came out 2 years ago now. And that excitement is still very much there, and now it just becomes a question of, okay, how am I going to take Power BI and hook it up to Jet Enterprise so I can see the data the way I want it to. And it works. You do have to be on the right version of SQL Server, right? There are some little caveats and asterisks there, and I'm more than happy to answer questions about that. But as you start analyzing your data in Power BI or Excel, you wanted to make sure that all of the metrics exist in the Jet Data Manager, and that's why we had this little tutorial. Ha! If you want to see a demo with your live data, or if you're interested in more training or services or support on your implementation, even if it's something as little as getting your business function library installed, give me a holler at jae@onyxreporting.com. I'm available for freelance and consulting services. I'm really excited to work with you guys, so hope to hear from you soon. Have a great, is it Saturday? Saturday. Catch you later. Cheers. Bye.